There's a lot of unique custom keyboards on the market today. Some of them are really cool, and some of them definitely should not exist. But one of the keyboard layouts of all time is the Happy Hacking keyboard. It's just a variation of the 60% layout, but with a couple differences that I'll get into later. But what makes this keyboard layout so special? To answer that question, we first need to go back to the golden age of the 1990s that I unfortunately didn't get to experience due to not being born yet. During this era, it was just starting to get popular for families to purchase and own personal computers. Because computers were just starting to get popular, aftermarket keyboards weren't a thing yet, so users were just stuck with whatever keyboards came with their computers. And as computers got more and more complex, the keyboards that came with them got more and more complex as well. The problem with this is that every time you got a new computer, you would be forced to adapt to a new keyboard layout. A professor at the University of Tokyo by the name of Dr. A.T. Wada noticed this problem, and it sparked him to create a new keyboard layout that was both compact and practical, so that way one could use it with any computer for a lifetime without ever feeling the need to change it. He was inspired by the classic American cowboys. Now, unfortunately, I haven't been able to talk to any of them personally because none of them are alive anymore. But apparently, whenever they got stranded in the desert, they would leave their horses to die, but they would always take their saddle with them no matter how far they had to carry it. And the reason for this is because the saddle is an interface that has been deeply adapted to their bodies over the years, whereas the horse is just a consumable item. So Dr. Wada took this theory and applied it to the modern day. A computer is simply a consumable item that gets replaced every few years, but a keyboard is an interface that we use every day. So, Dr. Wada teamed up with a company called PFU, and together they created the original Happy Hacking keyboard in 1996. So I've talked this much already, but I still haven't explained what's so special about the HHKB layout. So I'll just start with the most noticeable difference, and that's how left and right control have been removed from their normal spots. In place of those two keys, there's just a single control key in place of caps lock. Now I really hated this change at first, and I would often still try to press where the normal control was with my pinky, and I'd just hit the edge of the keyboard where there's no key at all and just get frustrated and feel like an absolute donkey of lower intelligence. But after about a week or so, I actually got used to it, and I think it's a really great design now, because now that it's in line with home row, it actually makes it much easier to press since I don't need to move my hand at an awkward angle to reach it. And I don't mind the change that caps lock is missing either, because I never use caps lock ever and I don't even feel the need to have it on the keyboard in the first place. The second most noticeable difference about the HHKB is that backspace has been moved one key down, and instead of the original 2-unit backspace, there's actually two 1-unit keys instead. And in my opinion, while this doesn't give the keyboard an actual ergonomic or practical improvement compared to normal, the benefit is that when you have split backspace, it actually gives the edges of your keyboard this beautiful symmetry. And since I'm a sucker for aesthetics, I think it's worth getting used to. The third and final big difference that the HHKB makes is that right shift has now been split into two keys to make space for an extra function key. I actually think this is the most practical change out of all of them because it solves the problem that all 60% suffer from, which is the lack of dedicated arrow keys. But when you have the extra function key to the right of shift, it allows you to access the arrow keys in a very comfortable position, which you can't normally do. Now you might be saying, why bother with all of that and just get a 65% instead? And now, while I can't argue against its practicality, what I will say is that the 65% puts its keys in such a perfect size and position that exactly fail to please the eye. In the modern day, even over 25 years later, Happy Hacking keyboards are still being produced, whether they be the original PFU models or community-made HHKB style customs. The PFU models are actually popular with some enthusiasts due to their use of Topra switches, which I won't get into in this video since that's a whole nother topic. But long story short, the first HHKB I bought was actually solely for the purpose of trying Topra. When I first started using the keyboard, I really hated the new layout because there's so many things you have to get used to. But after about a week or two of getting used to it, I actually fell in love with it because I realized that HHKB is not only extremely practical, but it executes that practicality with a beautiful minimalistic aesthetic. The keyboard simply has all of the keys I want where I want them. Nothing more, nothing less. As someone who brings my keyboard everywhere, whether it be to school or a friend's house or the bath, the HHKB layout is perfect for me because of its elegant balance of portability and practicality. If I were to go any smaller to, let's say for example a 40, it would be much too impractical because the number row is missing and then I'd have to deal with layers and stuff. And yes, I would know because I dailied one for 3 months. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, if I were to go slightly bigger to let's say a 65, it would also be a little bit impractical because it would have extra keys that I wouldn't end up using and therefore unnecessary bulk. But I've been daily driving the HHKB for about a year now, so I could say with confidence that this is my favorite layout I've ever had the pleasure of typing on. Now unfortunately, life is never as simple as I wish it could be, and no matter how Razer tries to convince you, there's no end-all, be-all, best keyboard layout. Different people have different uses for their boards. For example, some people have to have number pads or macro keys, or some people want some crazy ergonomic stuff that I still can't wrap my head around. But I guess that just goes to show that the best keyboard layout is the one that brings you the most joy using. Now, to answer the big question, should you buy an HHKB? Realistically speaking, probably not. As of right now, there's not any good budget options for the HHKB layout to my knowledge, so getting one would mean you have to drop at least a couple $100s at minimum, and there's honestly much better things you could do with that money than spend it on a keyboard. I learned this lesson in my life firsthand, and I admit I wasted way more money than I should have on keyboards, and I wish I hadn't. I could have upgraded my car, or explored a new hobby, or just saved my money so that way I don't need to work so hard in the future. But if you're already planning on spending a decent chunk of money on a new build, it doesn't matter if you're just getting into the hobby, or you're a TKL guy, or a 65s guy, or even one of these guys. If you've never owned an HHKB before, I would definitely recommend picking one up. When I first got mine, I thought there was no way I would actually enjoy using this, but here I am a year later making a video on how much I like it. So who knows, you might end up falling in love with the layout like I did, or you might just end up hating it and then you could flip your board on Mech Market. So that's where I'll end the video for today. I guess the goal of the video wasn't to convince you to buy an HHKB, but rather I just wanted to share my opinions on something that I found joy in over the past year. But if you do end up trying an HHKB because of this video, I would be honored to hear about it. So anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all again in a couple months.